Welcome to the Scarlet Report. In this video, we're going to talk about how Michael Carrick could potentially approach his baptism of fire against Pep Guardiola's Manchester City on Saturday. In this video, I'm going to analyze some of the tactical weaknesses and strengths in this Manchester City team that could define the outcome of the Manchester derby on Saturday. Without further ado, let's analyze. First, let's get started with the clip. So here we have Matheus Nunes, who plays mainly as a right back for Manchester City, scanning the pitch ahead of him and then identifying and tracking this smart shadow run by Reinders into the half space. This shows Manchester City's ability and also intention when it comes to exploiting those half spaces. But also note the positioning of Phil Foden, who plays as a wide 10 for Manchester City, as well as Bernardo Silva, who plays as a right winger. All right, so basically this Pep Guardiola system, when it comes to exploiting the half spaces, works this way. So basically in the build-up, there is not really much that is special about this Manchester City team. But what's really interesting about them is their wingers, because Bernardo Silva and Doku, who play mainly on the wings for Manchester City lately, they move like really high up the pitch, but also really wide. And the reason why they do this is actually to drag these wide players, generally speaking, the fullback, sometimes also the wide midfielders into wide areas. And by doing this, they actually expand this space between, the center backs and right-sided defensive midfielders, for example, and the right midfielder and the right back of the opposition. Therefore, creating these spaces right here, the half spaces. But also Manchester City, the way they play kind of like a 4-1-4-1 kind of shape, or 4-5-1 shape. It doesn't matter how you call it. With these players being extremely important. These players, the number 8, the number 10s, who play in the half spaces mainly, the likes of Reinders, the likes of Phil Foden, Ryan Sharkey as well. So basically they have wingers that move really wide. And then that's where players like Matheus Nunes, either they can exploit these spaces by creating overlaps and then running with the ball into these areas right here, or they can play passes like in the sequence that I showed with these players moving into these areas. And so basically the moment the ball comes in here, then actually that's how Manchester City score most of their goals, which is by using these cutbacks from these half spaces. So yeah, I'm definitely not in a position right now to show you all of the Manchester City goals that came from this kind of play, because otherwise, this channel is going to get, another copyright strike. But what is really interesting and what is important to note here is just how common and prevalent this pattern of play is in Pep Guardiola's Manchester City. Now, what is the potential solution? Well, the solution is something that Erik ten Hag has done against Manchester City in the FA Cup final. I don't have access to that footage anymore. That was a game that was a long time ago, but I made a video on it. And in that video, I showed how Erik ten Hag, by using a midfield trio of Scott McTominay and Kobbie Mainoo, who were both hardworking, those like water carrier type of players who were applying a lot of pressure in the wings and, plugging those half spaces. But then we also had Amrabat in that number 6 position. That was, in my opinion, his best game in a Manchester United shirt, because he was able to kind of shuttle horizontally and just plug any gaps that he identified in the Manchester United defensive shape to prevent the Manchester City players from exploiting those half spaces. And that system worked. It also worked for Al Hilal against Manchester City in the Clubs World Cup, and there is no reason why it would not work for us on Saturday if it is executed properly. But what's important here is that we definitely need to prevent Manchester City from exploiting those half spaces. All right, now let's talk about one of Manchester City's most glaring weaknesses. It's a weakness that originally used to be a strength, which is their ability to press with intensity. Because while Manchester City are able to suffocate opponents with their press, sometimes when they play against teams that are quite potent when it comes to their vertical progression, teams like Brighton, most notably in their most recent game, but also Manchester United with players like Lisandro Martinez. In fact, Pep Guardiola's comments following their defeat in the FA Cup final against us on Lisandro Martinez kind of echo that same feeling. It can actually put Manchester City in an extremely vulnerable place, because as they press with like 4, 5, sometimes 6 players, if those defenders end up being pinned down into their own areas, then it literally kind of separates the Manchester City team into 2 clusters. One cluster that presses really high, and then another cluster that is pinned deep by the opposition forwards, which leaves a lot of spaces in midfield that can actually be exploited, especially with those kind of forward strikers that are very good at holding up the play and linking up the play. So with the combination of, very bold and accurate, line-breaking passes from the defenders, some good hold-up play and link-up play from the strikers, as well as pace on the wings and those, third man runs that, Brighton has done very well in the recent game, but also a lot of Manchester United players are capable of doing. Manchester City can really find themselves in a situation where they are actually chasing after the opposition during the game. So as you can see here, during the build-up phase, Manchester City prefers to actually press with intensity and man-mark the opposition to make it really hard for the opposition to build up. Now, generally speaking, the traditional, the intuitive solution to this problem is actually to have some of your forward players and attacking midfielders to actually come in deeper. Why? Because you're trying to create more passing lanes, more options for your players. But what this does is that, generally speaking, Manchester City, they just react by actually pressing with more, aggression, with more intent in order to prevent you from building up effectively. But what teams like Brighton, as well as Simone Inzaghi with Al Hilal did during the club's World Cup, I think that is a very elegant and smart solution to this problem, is to actually to push your players, your forward players, all into very high and wide positions. What this does is that, of course, the Manchester City defenders, they're not stupid. They're not kamikazes. What they're going to do is that, of course, as a result, they're going to actually be more conservative with their movements, with how they push forward. If you push some of your wing backs as well, or right backs and left backs as well, then that means that actually effectively you end up dividing up the Manchester City team into two clusters effectively. So you have the first cluster right here, which is the pressing cluster, and then you're going to have another cluster right here, which is kind of like the defensively pinned cluster, who of course cannot venture forward because of the players that you have available. So that means that actually these spaces right here between these two clusters can actually be exploited by your players, who can now actually drop and receive the ball and turn, like I've shown you in those previous sequences. And this is something that can definitely work for Manchester United for a plethora of reasons, for a variety of reasons. Because first of all, there are four things that are going for us, okay? The first thing is that many of our defenders, including Aiden Heaven, including Lisandro Martinez, even Luke Shaw, they're actually quite good at playing those vertical progressive passes. The second thing is that when it comes to those strikers who have good hold-up play, we don't lack options, starting from Xerxes to Sesko, but also Mbemo. A lot of Manchester United fans are asking, how can we play Amad Diallo and Mbemo in the same team? Well, you could play Amad as a right winger, and then Mbemo as kind of like a false nine. He's quick, but also he's technical, he's smart, good link-up play, but also he's strong like an ox. He can actually hold up the ball, so he can play in that role. Also, we have players like Mateus Cunha, Mason Mount, and Bruno Fernandes, who are actually quite good at these second balls. So even if the striker does not win the first ball, they can actually win those second balls. And then they have the perfect blend of industry, and technique and vision. So they can actually turn those second balls into, line breaking passes, into passes to the fourth thing going for us, which is these fast, agile, nimble, and technical wingers that we have, the likes of Amad, the likes of Mbemo, but also even potentially, the likes of Dorgu and Dalot, if Michael Carrick chooses to actually play them in very high positions rather than actually involve them as inverted wing backs, or, to form a back three with the center backs. Last but not least is something that is not tactical per se, but rather an observation that I have made about the Manchester City players. While all of them are talented, no doubt about that, many of them, especially the defenders, they seem to struggle when they face adversity. I don't know if you guys are fans of David Attenborough and, animal documentaries the way I am, but I've learned that one of the best ways to deal with a charging elephant is to stare it in the eye and charge it back. Now, I'm not going to try it. Feel free to try it if you'd like. I don't have the balls to do that. But to me, it's a perfect analogy to explain what I'm trying, the point that I'm trying to drive across with regards to the Manchester City players. So there are many examples when you watch Manchester City of their players struggling when they are facing players who want to dribble at them, who want to make runs at them. The more balls we put into the box, the more likely that they're going to make mistakes, okay? The more you dribble them, the more they're going to concede fouls, and the more they're going to start getting frustrated and irritated, which is going to make their play sloppy. So I think that Manchester United need to be quite bold in this game against Manchester City, like a charging elephant. Look at them in the eye and just dribble past them, humiliate them, nutmeg them. Just get the ball into the box, okay? Just to get those positive vibes, and then to, of course, give them a knock to their confidence, because a confident Manchester City can really be dangerous. Equally, a confident Manchester United, especially against Manchester City, could also be dangerous. So we have to play courageous game. That's what we gotta do. And if Manchester City, and when they face a team that plays with courage, generally speaking, they struggle. All right, so to summarize, and again, echoing what I said about Michael Carrick in my previous Michael Carrick video, the one where I said that philosophy can wait. I don't really care about the formation that Michael Carrick plays. I don't really care about what his ideology, what his footballing philosophy, what his style of play is. But what I know for sure is that in order to beat this Manchester City team, he definitely needs to take into consideration what I just talked about. So our game plan should focus on preventing them from exploiting the half spaces. It should also be built around the idea of baiting the press from Manchester City and then playing through that press in order to expose them in those areas by using some players who are able to hold up the ball, to have very smart link-up play. And we do have plenty of players like that in order to, exploit those spaces between those two clusters. The cluster of Manchester City players who press with aggression, and then the cluster of defensive Manchester City players who get pinned into their own half. And of course, we need to play with courage, both in terms of the decisions and choices that we make with the ball, our willingness to dribble with the ball, and to just create some excitement and build our confidence as the game unfolds. Now, I'm not here to predict the future. That's not my business. I'm not a betting man. I don't really care about that. What I care about is just highlighting some of the things that I feel could be quite relevant, comes Saturday night. On the time when I'm going to be sitting here on my desk working on my post-match analysis video, I would be really curious to actually look back at this video and see how some of the things that I've talked about in this video ended up unfolding in the game. So anyway, guys, I hope that you've enjoyed this tactical analysis video. If you did, please give the video the thumbs up. Until next time, cheers.